I think that the idea of making more movies is something that doesn't need to exist, but I think in this case could exist. I think the way they chose to do it, though, was weird. Hi ho, Kermit the Frog. Wait, no, scratch that. It's time to sit down, put in those earbuds so as not to disturb the neighbors, and join us for another episode of Off Book, a podcast where we talk all about Broadway, movies, TV shows, and anything else that we want to geek out about. I'm Mark Stouffer the Third.
And I'm Ashley Szuma. Today we're going to rewrite some popular movies and some plays that we think missed the mark.
This is part 2 of our rewriting film franchise series. Last week we took on Harry Potter and the Cursed Child on Broadway. Make sure to check that out if you missed it. And like I said last week, this is in no way us trying to say that we're better than the original writers. We're just trying to give it a new perspective and see what we would have done differently and what we would have done the same. Next, we're going to take a look at the sequel trilogy from Star Wars. That would be episodes 7, 8, and 9. When Disney originally announced the sequel trilogy in the Star Wars universe, it was an overwhelming why. It kind of ended on a good note originally. You have the story of Luke and Vader and the Death Star, and then you have the story of how well that came to be, and there doesn't really seem to be a good way to move forward, so why? But okay, maybe you'll make something good. And then episode 7 came out, and people went, we don't like this. So Lucasfilm went, okay, we are going to hire somebody completely different to completely change everything. And they made episode 8, and everyone's like, yeah, we don't like this either. So then they hired the first guy back, and he said, okay, make a sequel to episode 7, but ignoring episode 8. And so they made episode 9, and everyone's like, yeah, this isn't good either. For the sake of time, we're going to ignore all the standalone movies like Solo and Rogue One, and focus just on episode 7, 8, and 9. I think that the idea of making more movies is something that doesn't need to exist, but I think in this case could exist because the universe is so big. I think the way they chose to do it, though, was weird. As it stands, the main character seemed to be Rey, who, spoiler alert, apparently has no connection to anyone except Emperor Palpatine. We're going to get to that, don't worry. And Finn, who was an ex-stormtrooper, which I actually like. I liked the idea of having a stormtrooper because it kind of gives humanity to these people that up until this point have just been mercilessly killed. However, even though one of their resistance fighters is an ex-stormtrooper and understands these are all people, they continue to kill stormtroopers and to scream about it. And it's like, yay! I killed these people that I used to work with, and that was strange. And then you have Kylo Ren, who was Han Solo's son, and was also the villain of the trilogy, and that seemed like such a good idea. I think that there was so much could have done with that, and they didn't. And I think that the combination of those weird characters and the two different directors that ignored the other one, and the fact that I think they came up with an idea that they thought would work after announcing the fact that they were going to make a trilogy instead of the other way around like it should be. And so I think it just ends up being something that if you don't know anything about the original trilogy or about the characters or about what went on behind the scenes, it might look okay. But if you've watched the original movies, if you know what happened, it's very obvious that something here is definitely not right.
Yeah, but the thing is, it felt different. It didn't feel like Star Wars. It felt like a weird trying to be Star Wars. It just felt like they're trying to remake the original movies, but failing at it.
Well, and J.J. Abrams had said that episode 7 was supposed to be a remake, essentially, of A New Hope. That was his goal, was to copy the original movie for fan service. But if your best bet is to just remake it, maybe don't make them.
Yeah, exactly. And it would have been better if more of the original characters were in it. But in the first movie, there's Han and Leia, and that was about it. Luke wasn't in it, and it just felt weird. And I didn't like how they rewrote it. It could have been very good, and it wasn't obvious that they were rewriting A New Hope. But the problem with it is it was not good enough to the point where we didn't realize that they were just trying to rewrite A New Hope. It was very obvious that they were doing that.
Exactly. I think that with the sequel trilogy, you find yourself running into a very similar issue as Harry Potter and the Cursed Child did, where you have this iconic trilogy, you have these iconic characters, and you're bringing them back but they're old now. And so they can't be the stars of the trilogy because they're old, and it would cost $1.5 billion to pay Mark Hamill to be the lead in a Star Wars film. They paid him millions of dollars to hold a lightsaber at the end of Episode 7, so there's no way they could do that. And so I think that making the transition from the original characters to the new characters was a good idea. And I think that the way that they did it, where they had the original characters kind of play mentor to the new characters, was a good idea. I do think, however, that it was very blatant that they were just using the original characters to fill spots in the character list from the original movie. So Luke just became Obi-Wan, and Han Solo maybe didn't have a direct character comparison, but he was very much acting as a mentor to what was essentially supposed to be his younger self. And so I think if they had found better ways to use those characters where they weren't just playing other characters that existed in the originals, it could have worked better. You and I talked about this before. I think that if they decided to focus on Ben Solo, it would have been a significantly better trilogy, especially considering that we see in the first movie there's a flashback montage, spoiler alert for the sequel trilogy, by the way, that Han Solo's son is Kylo Ren and is the leader of the First Order, which is essentially just the Empire, but different. And we see that Luke trained Ben Solo, and Ben Solo was becoming good, and then eventually turned to the dark side, and Luke blamed himself and went into hiding, and then Ben became Kylo Ren and built this First Order, but still didn't exactly know what he was doing and was just trying to be a ripoff of Darth Vader. And I think that, to me, that sounds like a significantly better story, especially since we haven't seen it. We've seen something similar to it with Anakin, but that was very much a story of failed expectations. Whereas I think you have something similar with Ben Solo, but then the story continues. It isn't just him becoming a villain. He's trying to build this thing, and he's failing. I think that the fact that he doesn't know what he's doing, he isn't Darth Vader. And I think that if you had spent more time with him, rather than with Luke and Han 2.0, which is all Rey and Finn were, let's be honest, I think that would have made a much more compelling story that would have been different, but that still could have paid homage to the original story by including the original characters and using a lot of the same themes and story devices.
Yeah, I definitely feel like we just saw too much of characters that really had nothing to do with the story. I love Finn, but he just, like, obviously he's a side character, you know? I also feel like Rey should have been a side character. She should not have been the main character, because she just, like, is just, like, a person that kind of is insignificant. We don't really find out why she would have a slight significance until the last film. And it kind of just felt like they were dragging it along. Like, who is this girl? Why is she here? That's why a lot of people were, like, believing that she was a Skywalker, because she was just in these films. And we're like, oh, she's got to have some relation to them. Like, there's no way she's not. But then she's not. So it's like, then what was the point of putting her in here with a character who was killed? It just didn't make sense to me. Like, it really, really didn't.
Yeah. Are you ready for an ad?
Sure.
Well, good. People all over the world like to try to critique and or rewrite delayed sequels and spin-offs of popular entertainment franchises. Many people say that they would have made them better than the original creators. Not us, but some people. Unfortunately, in order to write a delayed sequel, you first have to write an extremely good franchise. And that can be hard. Introducing the ultra-popular, super famous franchise Generator 3000. Input whatever ideas you have, pull the lever, wait a couple years, and your franchise will be fully complete and ready for the theater. Just in time for you to start working on a sequel. Back to the main program. I think that for me, first of all, I don't understand why they decided to bring Palpatine back. There was no setup for that. There was no reason for that. There was no payoff for that. There was literally no reason whatsoever. So we're not going to do that. Palpatine is long gone. He's staying gone. Get over it. From there, I think we back up a movie. So the events of Rise of Skywalker never happened. We end with the events of The Last Jedi, but The Last Jedi isn't actually The Last Jedi. Because Episode 7 is chronicling the story of Ben Solo, the son of Han Solo, who can be in the movie because it's his son we're dealing with, who's training with Luke to become a Jedi. Eventually things go south, and this seems an awful lot like what happened with Anakin. But by the end of the first movie, Episode 7, you are left with this character, Kylo Ren, who has turned to the dark side, But because we spent this whole movie with him, it seems very much like this is wrong. I've already felt like we connect with him, and it's a slight departure from the original material, because we're following a villain, and we don't know if he's going to be a villain yet. So there's a struggle where he's tempted by the dark side, but he hasn't fallen to it yet, and then by the end he falls. Episode 8 is the first time we meet anybody else from the current sequel trilogy. So Rey and Finn aren't even in episode 7. By episode 8, at the beginning, Kylo Ren is trying to build this First Order. He studied Darth Vader in the Empire. He wants to bring something like that back. He's kind of adopting this Kylo Ren persona. And we have these two subplots, much like Harry Potter and the Cursed Child, where you have, on the one hand, Kylo Ren is trying to build this evil organization. And on the other hand, you get introduced to these characters who aren't terribly important, and are just kind of random people, but that's okay. One of whom is a stormtrooper that worked with Kylo Ren and has since met up with the resistance that has recently formed, and they're trying to fight each other. And so you see both of these sides, which I think adds a new depth. Because before, the Empire was kind of just this, they're evil, and they're evil. Whereas now, I think you get some of this back and forth, and you get to have some of these conversations about who's right, and everyone thinks they're right. And then episode 9 can really be some of that redemption arc that you started to see in the current trilogy, where Kylo Ren is talking to Rey, not through random Force phone calls. Do you use the Force to connect a Zoom call? Is that what's happening? Did episode 9 predict COVID-19? I think it did. Anyway, they actually start to become friends, and you get this redemption arc. And honestly, I don't know how it would end. But I think that if you focus on Ben Solo and his kind of fall to the dark side, and then rise in the ranks, and then eventual potential redemption arc, I think that that's a much more compelling story, because we haven't seen a full-on character study with all the action and romance and other things you've come to love from Star Wars in the movies, but it's not all about just trying to replicate how it was done.
Yeah, and I'm glad that they had Ben's redemption arc in there, because it definitely showed us he's still good. I think it definitely gave us the same feel as Darth Vader. This kid who just wanted power to be able to do stuff. With Anakin, it was save Padme. With Ben, it was just he wanted power. And then they both rose to be these evil beings. And then they're like, wait, I'm still good. Let me help you. And it definitely felt like that Darth Vader kind of character arc, and that was one thing that I really enjoyed about it. And I just think that there are some parts of these films that just didn't make sense, and that's the kind of sad part, when Luke is being all mean and
I'm not going back, I'm not gonna be Jedi anymore, blah blah blah.
That's not something Luke would do. We know this. And so he didn't seem like Luke to me. He just seemed like this old hermit who didn't care about anything. And it was just kind of that's not Luke. Who is this guy? What was the point of that? And then when he dies, but doesn't, he meditates so hard, his Force ghost goes and saves this thing. It didn't make sense.
I don't know. Yeah, I have nothing wrong with saying that the Force can do new things, because of course it can. We're always learning new things with the Force, and Luke is getting stronger, but to meditate so hard that he can appear as a fully formed human and then die, and also the fact that Yoda can appear as a Force ghost and grab Luke's lightsaber. Do you mean to tell me that Force ghosts could have been helping in battles and actually fighting this entire time, and they've just been chilling instead? Alright, thank you, Yoda, for giving me some advice. Can you get in the battle and fight, please? Use your lightsaber. You can hold lightsabers now. Why haven't you before?
Yeah, it really just doesn't make sense. We don't see much of Force ghosts, except for, in Return of the Jedi, when Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Yoda are just sitting there smiling at the celebration ceremony with the Ewoks. That's all we really see of Force ghosts. I mean, obviously there's gonna be a little more Yoda and his little talks with Luke and blah blah blah, but how is it possible that these non-solid beings can just pick up stuff and just like, oh my gosh, but like you can't help. Like you were saying, like there's definitely like, you know, advances in the Force, but also like it's just the Force phone calls.
Force Zoom calls. Zoom calls.
Okay, I'm sorry. But it's just, it doesn't make sense. Like how can these people communicate through the Force? Like it doesn't make sense.
Especially with how little screen time they actually have together. They're not together that often, but the majority of their screen time is through these Force Zoom calls. And how did they know to do that? They didn't. They just accidentally stumbled upon a waiting room.
Oh, let me do a Zoom call.
And he was like, okay, cool. And then just set up a weekly Zoom call? Is that... what?
And if that could have happened earlier, like, they probably would have done so much better. Like,
oh, yeah.
With these random Force things, like Obi-Wan didn't even have to go to the battles. He could just talk to Anakin through the Force. Like, it doesn't make sense.
Exactly. Anyway, I think that if you straighten out some of the inconsistencies that happened because of the two different directors, if you scrap the Palpatine thing because that's terrible and it didn't need to happen, and if you focus more on Ben Solo, and I think that, like you mentioned, having him up against the silhouette of Darth Vader, metaphorically speaking, I think was a really good choice. And I think that if you explore that more, if you get to see how much his arc is similar to Darth Vader's, but then also he's trying to be Darth Vader, but also be his own person, not make the same mistakes. So you can have a similar arc, but you're also taking those tropes and turning them on their head again. So it isn't just the prequel trilogy you copied, because that would be, you shouldn't copy a trilogy. Let's go copy this trilogy instead. But I think if you use those similarities and those preconceived notions to your advantage, I think you have a much more compelling story that doesn't feel like something we've seen before.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I feel like we should have seen more of Ben, because Ben is, or Kylo Ren, whatever you want to call him, but he is connected to these main characters, these old characters. And I mean, I guess Rey is too, but like, annoyingly, that shouldn't have happened because we all know he died. So it just doesn't make, like, these things just don't line up. And I feel like it would have been so much better if we explored Ben's character a lot more. Even when you look at the originals, like Vader's in there a lot. And obviously with the prequels too, because we see the rise of Darth Vader, but Ben was not in these movies enough.
And he's the most compelling character. I'll say that. He's the most compelling character of that entire trilogy.
He carried the series.
Mm-hmm. Plus, Adam Driver is amazing. So, good job acting, Adam Driver. I mean, everyone else did a very good job acting, too. They just weren't given as much to work with as far as material.
Exactly.
Anyway, that's going to do it for today's episode. If you want more episodes like this, feel free to let us know in the comments below.
Make sure you join us next week when we talk about some movies that we think would be cool on Broadway and vice versa. Until then, a special thank you to the Jedi for keeping our galaxy safe. We couldn't obsess over these movies without you.